President Trump says the United States and Iran will meet next week as he pushes back against an early intelligence report about the U.S. strike. At the NATO summit, Trump urges Putin to end his war with Ukraine. And as the Senate prepares to vote on President Trump's big, beautiful bill, we'll talk to a Republican senator about potential cuts to rural hospitals. Hello, I'm Caitlin Huey-Burns in Washington. Welcome to The Takeout. President Trump met with European leaders at the NATO summit in the Netherlands today, but he had the Middle East on his mind. The president aggressively pushed back against an early report from the Defense Intelligence Agency that the U.S. strike against Iran set back their nuclear capabilities by months and did not obliterate it, as Trump has said. Still, the president insisted Iran's nuclear program has been, quote, blown up to kingdom come, and that now he does not care if the U.S. and Iran reach an agreement. Nevertheless, he said, the two countries will meet next week.
We may sign an agreement. I don't know. The only thing we'd be asking for is what we were asking for before about we want no nuclear.
And speaking of meetings, the president talked to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky at the NATO summit today, and he said he's also going to speak with Russian President Vladimir Putin soon, saying Putin needs to end this war. Our own Ed O'Keefe has been traveling with the president and joins us now from the Netherlands. Ed, it's great to see you. I first want to refute what the president said today about you. He said you're not a nice guy. I think we all know that that is not true. You were the nicest among us, so just to clear the record there. But it is good to see you, and I know you were asking questions of the president today at this summit. Specifically, you asked him about whether this pause in hostilities, this ceasefire, will actually hold. What did he have to say about that?
Well, appreciate the fact check, Caitlin. And it came up in the context of him suggesting that while all this evidence may now suggest that his attacks weren't the complete success he touts them as, he's essentially now inferring that if he hadn't launched those attacks, perhaps there wouldn't be any peace. So we sought some clarity. Take a listen. You just said you believe the conflict between Israel and Iran is over. What makes you so confident it is? And what do you do if it isn't?
Because I dealt with both, and they're both tired, exhausted. They fought very, very hard and very viciously, very violently, and they were both satisfied to go home and get out.
Notably today, Caitlin, both the president and the Secretary of State did suggest, look, there is a possibility that at some point in the coming years, Iran might restart its nuclear program and might try to build a weapon. But at least once, I think it was at least twice actually, the president said, look, it may come later on when I'm not here. So whether it was completely destroyed, whether it was set back by a few months, and that is still a subject of great debate and intelligence assessments, he's saying it's been stopped for now, and he believes it is ultimately going to help bring peace to the Middle East.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask you about, Ed, because I've been trying to kind of figure this out and hope you can answer this for me, which is that the president has been saying he wants nothing but a peace deal. But today he also said, look, we eradicated their nuclear program, so I don't really care if we get a deal or not. We'll see what happens there. Can you kind of make sense of those two statements? In other words, why meet next week if you don't really care about a deal?
Well, we've asked for more clarity about who would meet with the Iranians, where, under what conditions. So far, at least, the White House has nothing to share. But it does seem like he wants those conversations to continue since they had been going on for several weeks before this attack. Well, he basically said, you know, again, he doesn't want Iran to have a program. He believes they've blown it up. If they want to talk, let's talk. If not, well, fine. They'll go back to doing what they do. Israel will go back to being what it is, and we'll move on. It's not going to be that easy, though. I mean, there's been some significant damage done, a depletion of Iranian leadership, and Israel also, you know, has a lot of questions about the future of its existence and standing there in the Middle East and what to do about Iran. So we'll see whether or not there really are talks next week and to what extent there is U.S. involvement.
All right, our Ed O'Keefe asking questions of the president. I'm sure running on very little sleep, if any at all. Safe travels home, and we'll see you soon. Thank you. And turning now to Colorado, where the suspect in the terror attack in Boulder will be tried on a dozen hate crime charges. He's accused of using Molotov cocktails to attack a group of people marching for the release of Israeli hostages. Nicole Skanga joins me now with more on this. Nicole, thank you very much for being here. What can you tell us about this case, and what are you tracking?
Yeah, Caitlin, good to be with you. Soleiman will be tried, like you mentioned, on 12 federal counts of a hate crime, and he is accused of using those Molotov cocktails to attack members of the group they're called Run for Your Lives. On June 1st, they were walking to bring awareness to Israeli hostages held by Hamas. That attack left 15 people injured. The suspect told law enforcement later that he wanted to take revenge and that he had searched for quote-unquote Zionist events. Now, the case is under investigation by the FBI and the Boulder Police Department. But in terms of the wider threat picture, and I know you'll hear from Secure Community Network shortly, but the ADL says the number of anti-Semitic incidents in the U.S. reached a record high last year. They note that 58% of the tracked 9,354 incidents related back to Israel. And one key reason for the widespread opposition is the widespread opposition, to Israel's military response in Gaza post-October 7th. So the fear here is that the conflict with Iran could inspire even more anti-Semitic attacks, because we know that conflict does not happen in a vacuum, and what is happening overseas impacts events here in the homeland.
And Nicole, that's great backdrop context for this new reporting that you and your team have, which is that the FBI is boosting its counterterrorism program here. What more can you tell us about that?
Yeah, this is really interesting, Caitlin. Always interesting when the FBI has to reinforce its counterterrorism mission, but the FBI intensifying not only its focus, but also resources on these threats, according to a memo distributed to FBI field office directors this week, really instructing them to focus personnel on terror threats, including domestically. And that shift, though we don't have an exact number in personnel, comes after internal complaints from employees within the FBI about being pulled off of counterterrorism cases and counterintelligence tasks to focus instead on immigration enforcement, according to sources who we've been speaking with. And this is amid, of course, the nationwide immigration crackdown, with the Trump administration aiming to arrest 3,000 unauthorized migrants a day. Now, FBI is among several law enforcement components under the Department of Justice being tapped to maximize the number of immigration arrests. But the FBI reset also follows an internal FBI report prioritizing putting maximum pressure on Iran and its terror proxies, plus the Department of Homeland Security's very public activation of its National Terrorism Advisory System, one of the many indications that America's lights are now blinking red, Caitlin.
Yeah, a lot of resources needed for this, unfortunately. But thank you, Nicole, for your reporting. We appreciate it. And Michael Masters joins me now. He's the National Director and CEO of Secure Community Network. It's a Jewish community safety and security organization. Michael, it's great to see you. Thanks for being here. Can you tell us a little bit about what your organization actually does and describe the scope of threats that you may be tracking?
Sure. The Secure Community Network serves as the official safety and security organization for the Jewish community across North America. We were formed after 9/11 really to deal with the increased threats from foreign terrorist organizations. Of course, the threat dynamic has only gotten more complex and dynamic since 9/11, from violent extremists who adhere to supremacist ideology to those that are affiliated with Iran and its proxies, or those who are radicalized to violence. So every day our team of law enforcement professionals, all former law enforcement, military, intelligence, are working across the country to identify threats. We have a team of analysts doing that 24/7, and then working with over 500 Jewish communities, over 12,000 Jewish institutions around the United States to ensure not just the safety of the Jewish community, but that we're preserving religious freedom and democracy in this country, which is what's under attack.
Absolutely. And so you're taking in all of this information and data and sharing it with law enforcement. across the board?
Coordinating every single day. Last year, we took in over 54 threat incident and suspicious activity reports, referred over 500 threats to life just to the FBI alone.
Wow. And I want to talk a little bit about the scope of that, too. Can you tell us what you've seen since the October 7th attacks? And then also, have you seen any sort of increase since the strikes just last week?
So in a post-10/7 environment, we saw just an explosion of those threats, over double post the attacks of 10/7 from the year prior. Since May 21st, when we had the attack here in Washington, D.C., targeting the two individuals leaving a Jewish event, the week after that, we had twice as many violent threats directed to the Jewish community, over 5,500 than the week before. That threat picture continued to increase after the attacks in Boulder that Nicole was just talking about. In the hours after the U.S. strike in Iran, we logged 1,680 violent posts online directed at the Jewish community alone.
And is that where you're seeing this incitement? Is it mostly online?
I mean, it's certainly demonstrating itself online, and people are comfortable enough to talk about it online, but it's also happening on our college campuses. It's happening on our city streets. It's happening in our city council meetings. You know, when people tell you who they are, we have to listen. The offender in Boulder said very clearly, "Free Palestine," as he was being arrested for throwing those Molotov cocktails. And he had been planning that attack for a year. It's by our good graces and good work that people weren't killed or more seriously injured.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are some action items that you were taking that perhaps members of Congress can take, people in positions of authority?
So first of all,
everyday
let's start with the everyday Americans. If you see something, say something. Some of our best tips, some of our best leads come from community members who see something suspicious and report it. That's vitally important whether you're going to a church, a mosque, or a synagogue. On the law enforcement side, we're coordinating every single day with law enforcement. Coming from law enforcement for over 20 years, we need more resources devoted to our state and local federal law enforcement agencies. They are just under intense pressure right now in a very complex environment. It's important that we provide them the resources that they need. We're asking increased support from Congress to fund law enforcement, to provide funds to protect houses of worship and nonprofit organizations, and then just working every single day together. The biggest thing that we can do is coordinate as a country to work together to prevent our adversaries. Iran didn't call just for deaths to Jews. They're calling to death to America. And that is a national security threat that we need to address as a collective country.
Yeah, everyone on high alert. Absolutely. You mentioned that you'd seen an uptick in threats since the shooting here in Washington. Can you describe how an event like that inspires more threats?
I mean, we have seen this in this country in most mass attacks going back to Columbine. We still have people who are undertaking attacks in schools that are referencing the Columbine offenders. And if you look at the three last attacks we had in this country, on Governor Shapiro's house in Pennsylvania, the D.C. attacks and the Boulder attacks, each one of those individuals, very different offenders, they all justified their attacks because of Israel's action in Gaza. Now that Israel's involved in Iran, now that we're involved with Iran, that creates another threat vector for us. So it's really important that we recognize that. We see that uptick. It's important that we get people to report things. They can go on our website, www.securecommunitynetwork.org, to file an incident report. They can go to other partners, our Jewish federations around the country as well.
So you're seeing an uptick the more events that we are seeing, unfortunately.
Yeah, we're hearing a call for violence, and unfortunately, enough people call, somebody picks up the phone.
Well, it's great to talk to you. Thank you very much. Difficult under these circumstances, of course, but I'm glad you're providing some course of action for people to report this. So good reminder. Thank you very much, Michael, for being here. We're going to take a quick break. Stay with us. You're watching The Takeout. Republican lawmakers are racing to send President Trump's budget bill to his desk by the end of next week. The legislation is currently being modified in the Senate and will need to be approved by both the upper chamber and the House before it goes to the president for his signature. So can lawmakers meet this Trump-imposed deadline of July 4th? Well, Kansas Republican Senator Roger Marshall is here to help answer that for us. Senator, it's great to see you on a very busy day for you all. So that's my first question is, can you get this done by July 4th? And what exactly are the holdups here, at least on the Senate side?
Well, Caitlin, it's great to be with you. And I'm putting the over-under for the Senate getting their stuff done Sunday at 10 a.m., and then we'll send it to the House and hopefully get it to the president by July the 4th. So that's my best guess. You know, what's the holdups? I think that we have a group of folks that think we're not cutting enough spending and a group that thinks we're taking too many cuts. So we're trying to find that sweet spot. And at the same time, lots of communication going on between our leadership, the House, and the president to find that sweet spot. But we need to do this. This will prevent the largest tax increase in American history. It's going to make the average American family about $1,000 a month more that they'll get to keep.
So it seems like you are supportive of the overall principles of this bill, but do you yourself have any sticking points, things that you need to see in order to see it passed?
Well, look, I've worked really hard. I've been fortunate to be on the Finance Committee, which has probably had the biggest say in this. So I'm probably got 90% of what I wanted, and I'm very willing to vote for it. Look, I wish we could have cut more spending. I think we cut about 1.6, 1.7 trillion. My biggest concern is this $37 trillion national debt we had. But look, I think the benefits outweigh some of the challenges there. Again, it'll prevent the largest tax increase in American history. It's going to fund the border. It's going to make our military secure. It's going to keep a child tax credit from going from $1,000 to $2,200. So we'll have a $2,200 tax credit, child tax credit, if we pass this bill. More flexibility with Pell Grants. So there's so many great things in it. I'll be able to live with not cutting enough spending.
And Senator, you have expressed support for adding money that would go to rural hospitals. There's a concern that some of these cuts to Medicaid and a change in the provider tax would have an effect on rural hospitals. I know there are a few different proposals out there for allowing some more funding there, but can you explain kind of what's at stake here if this funding isn't achieved?
Right. So first of all, rural America is struggling in general. Rural hospitals are a reflection of that rural economy. So when agriculture struggles, these hospitals struggle. So there's some really good things in this bill to help rural America. Things like to help with crop insurance, a 45Z tax credit. So there's lots of good things in here for agriculture, which will indirectly help those rural hospitals. But specifically, rural hospitals depend more on Medicare, not so much on Medicaid, but I think they need a grant. One of my 3 pillars of MAHA is affordable, meaningful access to health care. And right now, having Medicaid is not the same as access to health care. A third of physicians don't accept Medicaid, and at least another third make it next to impossible to get Medicaid. Now, look, I want to strengthen Medicaid. I want to preserve it. I want to protect it. I want to make sure that people in nursing homes have it, that people on disabilities have it, and children. But Medicaid's not necessarily the answer for rural America. I think some type of a grant where about half the money goes to rural hospitals and the other half to community health centers to make sure that primary care is being delivered.
Well, Senator, I take your point about what you're saying about the Medicaid program, but the provider tax, as it relates to all of this, helps pay for that, and that's going to be scaled back more in the Senate version than the House version. So how can you support something like that and then also say we need these funds for these hospitals?
You know, what we're suggesting we do with this provider tax is the same thing that Barack Obama had in his 2012 and 2013 budget. The provider tax is a scam, to be frank. We have countries making $2.5 billion on it a year. We have states that are getting zero and everything in between. It's simply a scam. Eventually, we need to roll it back to zero and then use more grants like I'm talking about would be much better. Value-based health care, the community health centers is something that will really help deliver better health care. We need to impact the chronic disease epidemic we have in this country. 60% of Americans have a chronic disease. 90% of the money we spend in this country on health care is being spent on these chronic diseases. And I think the community health centers are the secret there, that this is a place where let's say you have type 2 diabetes. We're going to teach you how to cook. We're going to help you with what you order, whether you're on SNAP or using typical traditional money. So I want to get in front of this chronic disease epidemic, and that's what's really going to impact the cost of health care.
And, sir, quickly, if I could ask you about Iran. You had said last week that you don't want to see the U.S. involved in any kind of greater conflict here. But I'm curious what you make of the president's decision to strike those nuclear facilities. And are you comfortable with the amount of information that Congress has right now? I mean, these briefings, these intelligence briefings have been pushed back. I understand you'll get one tomorrow. But are you comfortable with what you know, or do you want to know more?
Well, I think this is the most transparent White House you've ever seen. I think you know exactly where President Trump is coming from. Certainly, I talk to the White House almost on a regular basis, not necessarily with President Trump every day, but certainly whether it's Marco Rubio or someone from the White House is talking to us on a very regular basis. I support President Trump 110%. We went in there with a precision strike, mission accomplished. Hats off to the United States Air Force. We do have 50,000 troops over there in the Middle East. This isn't necessarily over. I hope it is. So certainly they're in our thoughts and prayers as well. But I think the president has got an A++ for how he handled all this. The world's safer today than it was a month ago.
All right, Senator Roger Marshall giving us that Sunday at 10 a.m. deadline for the Senate to pass the big, beautiful bill. Thank you very much. We'll hope you join us again soon.
Thank you.
Director Tulsi Gabbard now says new intelligence confirms Iran's nuclear facilities have been destroyed, but with no new public evidence. Our reporter panel digs in next on The Takeout. Welcome back to The Takeout. Here's a look at what else we're watching this evening. We're learning more about how much it costs taxpayers to hold a record 59,000 people in immigration detention. In exclusive reporting from our own Camilo Montoya Galvez, it costs ICE, on average, $165 per bed per day to detain one individual, according to government estimates. At the current detainee level, ICE is spending, on average, $9.7 million each day. And that number could rise. Internal agency figures show ICE has averaged around 1,200 daily arrests so far in June. And a former longtime Trump supporter who took part in the January 6th Capitol riot but refused and returned her presidential pardon says she's received a letter from former Vice President Mike Pence. Pamela Hemphill posted a photo of the letter commending her for her, quote, honorable decision. Hemphill pleaded guilty to a misdemeanor charge for her role in the Capitol riot. And initial results are in from yesterday's New York City mayoral primary. State Assemblyman Zoran Mamdani declared victory last night against former Governor Andrew Cuomo in the Democratic primary. New York uses ranked choice voting, so the official winner won't be known until next month. But assuming those preliminary results hold, Mamdani would have a tough battle ahead in the general election this November. Current mayor, you may remember, Eric Adams, he's still running, but as an independent, and Republican candidate Curtis Sliwa is also on the ballot. And Cuomo himself has not ruled out an independent run. So joining me now for all of this and more, White House correspondent for Semaphore, Shelby Talcott, and Notice reporter, political reporter, Reese Gorman. Guys, thanks so much for being here. So much going on this week, so appreciate your time and reporting. Let's start with the New York race, because yesterday we were wondering how this would shake out. If you don't live in New York, you're wondering what this means for the Democrats. I mean, they were kind of using this to see kind of where the soul of the party was. Reese, I'm curious, what are Democrats taking away from this? Are they pulling anything out in terms of tea leaves for kind of the national political environment?
Yeah, obviously, I mean, Democrats especially, I mean, you've seen kind of Chuck Schumer, one of the top New York officials, Hakeem Jeffries, one of the top Democrat in the House, Chuck Schumer, top Democrat in the Senate, both from New York, both kind of came out, congratulated Mamdani, but without endorsing him. It's almost like they're kind of like staying away. And I mean, to their point, Republicans are hitting them so hard on this. I mean, NRSC has been hitting this, the NRCC has been hitting this, Republicans in general have kind of just been really kind of going at it, being like, oh, look, the face of the party is a Democratic socialist. Think of that when it comes to the midterms. And I mean, some Democrats are getting this. U.S. Senator John Fetterman from Pennsylvania said that basically that
a Democrat. People may forget sometimes.
that Christmas came early for the GOP. Christmas came in July. And so a lot of them are using this to be like, oh, now we can message and be like, Republicans so long have been socialism as this boogeyman for elections. And now they can point to someone who's on the cusp of becoming mayor of America's largest city is a Democratic socialist.
Yeah, it's kind of like Democrats need a face of their party, and Republicans love nothing more than a foil. So he kind of serves as something for that. I mean, Shelby, what was so striking to me, though, about his campaign was the way in which he was going everywhere on podcasts, doing videos. It kind of reminded me a little bit about how Trump's messaging communication strategy was, kind of reaching new audiences, new people, younger people. I'm curious kind of how Republicans are looking at this as well, or what Democrats can take away from that part of it.
Yeah, he took the Donald Trump approach. He went on all of these sort of alternative media formats, and that was really successful for the president in the 2024 election. Democrats took notice of that. He is a younger candidate who sort of was able to navigate this new media landscape in a way that Cuomo wasn't able to, or didn't want to, or didn't think he needed to. But Republicans are really excited about this because, as you said, this was largely seen as sort of a referendum on the Democratic Party on how they're going to be able to push back on the White House. And if you remember during the 2024 election, one of the big reasons that Donald Trump won was because a lot of voters felt that the Democratic Party no longer represented them, that they had gone too far to the left. And so in the White House's eyes, this is actually a really good thing for the Republican Party and something that they're going to be able to message on.
And speaking of some of those, avant-garde podcasts, remember Call Her Daddy? Well, bear with me for this transition. There could be one called Call Him Daddy, because at the NATO summit today, thank you.
Good segue.
At the NATO summit today, the NATO head, well, let's just play what he had to say.
No, he likes me. I think he likes me. If he doesn't, I'll let you know. I'll come back and I'll hit him hard, okay? No?
But do you
He did it very affectionate. Daddy, you're my daddy.
Okay, so the head of NATO called Trump daddy. We won't talk about that, but I think it's a great plug. But this is another segue to talk about Trump at NATO today. I mean, he's at NATO, but obviously Iran is top of mind. And as you both have been reporting on the Hill and at the White House, there are these competing pressures for the president. I mean, he's got the MAGA base that says, okay, limit what you're doing. Then he's got some of the hawks who are dwindling on the Hill, but still very vibrant. Shelby, I know you've been doing some reporting kind of about how he's working through all of this. I mean, today seemed pretty defiant when it came to those intelligence reports.
Right. And what's really interesting about all of this is sort of what this represents in terms of the president's foreign policy doctrine. And I think the big thing is that everybody in the Republican Party has a different idea. You talk to more isolationists who have argued that there are things that the president has done that lean more towards being an isolationist, America first standard. And then he does things like strike Iran, which sort of, makes the hawks a little bit more happy. And I think the reality is he's somewhere in the middle. He's really creating this unique foreign policy doctrine where his foreign policy doctrine is essentially America first, what is going to be good for America in his eyes. It does not necessarily fit into any neat little box. And so that's been something that the Republican Party is grappling with and almost arguing over the past few weeks amid all of these strikes.
Yeah, and while he's over there and coming back and dealing with all of this, I mean, his agenda is in the balance here. I mean, he's been able to do a lot through executive order, but what he wants to last legislatively has to be done through Congress. And since every lawmaker talks to you on the Hill, what do you think is going to happen here? I mean, the president wants this on his desk by July 4th. That's next Friday.
That's really bold. I've been surprised before, but I think it's going to be extremely tough. The Senate itself hasn't even agreed on what they're going to vote. I mean, July 4th is a week away on Friday. And so, like, the Senate hasn't even agreed to their framework, and we're already some of the proposals that are public, House members are already coming out against. I reported 16 kind of more moderate Republicans yesterday kind of said that if the Senate's Medicaid cuts that they're looking to do end up in the final bill, that they won't vote for it. You have Freedom Caucus Chairman Andy Harris telling me that he's not feeling promising about what's going on in the bill right now. And I was talking to him basically. I was like, is there anything Trump could do to get you over the line? I mean, he voted president. He didn't even vote for the House bill.
Right.
And he said basically, like, no. I mean, the best thing that could happen with Trump right now is for the Senate to send their bill over. And we just go to conference and we just conference the two bills, which basically just not voted on, just get in. But that takes weeks. That's not going to get by July 4th. So it's really in trouble to get done.
The president's going to be twisting some arms tomorrow, holding an event at the White House tomorrow. So we'll stay tuned. Reese and Shelby, thank you very much for your time reporting. We appreciate it. And some lawmakers are still pushing for a war powers resolution despite the apparent ceasefire between Iran and Israel. And among them is California Congressman Mike Levin. He's coming up next on The Takeout. Several lawmakers are pressing for the passage of a measure that would require congressional approval for further military action against Iran. One of them is California Democratic Congressman Mike Levin, who joins me now. Congressman, great to see you. Thanks for being here. You represent an area of Southern California that is home to lots of military personnel and veterans, of course. So I know you're probably thinking about this when it comes to this issue. But the question I have is, now the president says it was a one-and-done strike, no more action is needed. Why then keep pressing for a resolution on this, have Congress be involved?
Well, Caitlin, you're absolutely right that I represent tens of thousands of Marines and sailors in and around Camp Pendleton, and I have no greater responsibility than to make sure that when we put our service members in harm's way, that we are clear-eyed about why we're doing it, what the evidence on the ground is, and what the mission is. And in this instance, there are so many questions that we still have. Congress has not received a classified briefing. It's been rescheduled it was supposed to be Tuesday at 3 p.m. Now it's Friday at 9 a.m. I certainly hope that it happens at that time. And we are receiving wildly different information about the facts on the ground, both the circumstances that led to the strike as well as the actual damage done to the nuclear program. We are all better off if Iran does not have a nuclear weapon, but we have to make sure that we are, again, clear-eyed when we go into war or when the Congress authorizes the use of military force. Under Article 1, it is absolutely clear that war powers reside with the Congress, and it's really unthinkable to me that Mike Johnson has just given away that power, saying that the War Powers Act, in his view, is unconstitutional. I think it couldn't be further from the truth, and I think it demonstrates that he is nothing more than a supplicant to the whims of the Trump administration.
I mean, on that note, I know you're waiting for intelligence briefings, but is there anything that you have seen that signals to you that further action may be needed here?
Well, I cannot share what I have seen with regard to classified information, but what I can tell you is that I have unanswered questions that we are now seeing, obviously, the public reporting around the damage that was actually done to the Iranian nuclear program, whether it was set back a few months or several years, as the president has stated. That's really important because if, in fact, the Iranians still have the capacity to be able to reconstitute a nuclear program quickly, those are facts that we need to know, particularly when the president is talking about allowing Iranian oil to go to China, for example. The administration has not consulted with Congress. They have not briefed Congress. And, all we are asking for is the recognition that we are a co-equal branch of government, Caitlin. This should not be controversial, and this is fundamentally different from what other presidents have done. One of the worst takes that I've heard out there is that somehow this is the same as what other presidents have done. It's not.
I want to ask you about something happening in California. Today, as you likely know, the Department of Education determined that California violated Title IX by allowing transgender athletes to compete against females. I'm curious, how are you thinking about this issue?
Well, I think that it really ought to be up to the sports governing agencies to determine the right course forward. I think that the federal bill that was proposed by my Republican colleagues here was a gross overreach. It would have allowed for inspections of young women and girls. I can tell you that's completely inappropriate. I would leave this to the sports governing authorities. And in general, I think there is an attack by this administration on the state of California and really on public education generally. I can tell you I'm very proud to have 2 kids that go to our public schools in California. I'm going to do everything I can to stand up for our public schools and also for kids. Let us not forget that right now this administration is proposing tearing food and health care away to literally millions of children and families across the country. I hope everybody remembers that as well.
And Congressman, since you are a Democrat, I've got to ask you about a primary that happened last night on the total opposite side of the country. Notwithstanding, are you taking any lessons from that primary, given that someone like Andrew Cuomo was defeated and the most, progressive voice won in that primary so far, it seems?
Well, we've been talking a lot about this today, what lessons can be learned. I think for me, the biggest is affordability. That is the most important issue of the day. It has been for years now, to make sure that people can actually afford, the basic necessities. And I know that the victor in New York City ran on cost of living on things like groceries and housing. I may disagree with the details of his prescriptions, but I think the diagnosis is the right one. And that was the case also for President Trump when he was running last November. He was talking about lowering prices and addressing the cost of living for things like groceries and the rest. But now, as of the poll I saw a couple days ago, he is 26 points upside down on inflation because the president hasn't been focused on inflation at all, far from it. And the tariffs have only made things worse.
All right, we will stay tuned to that bill that you were referencing as well, and these results too. Mike Levin, Congressman, thank you very much for coming here. Appreciate it.
Thanks. Appreciate it, Caitlin. Thank you.
And Congress wants to regulate cryptocurrency. We'll find out how next. That's on the Takeout. As lawmakers work to try to understand what cryptocurrency even is, efforts to regulate it are already underway. Last week, in a bipartisan vote, the Senate passed the Genius Act. It creates this regulatory framework for stablecoins. Okay, what are stablecoins, you may ask? Stablecoins are a type of cryptocurrency that's value is pegged to an alternative asset like the US dollar or the price of gold. Earlier this week, I spoke to Chief Strategy Officer at the financial technology company Circle, Dante Disparte, and his organization supports the Genius Act. So let's start with what's probably an easy question for you, but something that I need explained to me, and I think a lot of Americans do too, which is, what is stablecoin?
Yeah.
What does it do?
Well, great. It's a great question, and I'm glad you're asking it. A stablecoin, what we offer at Circle is a stablecoin known as USDC. It is effectively a dollar uploaded onto the internet, which allows people to send, spend, save, and secure their money in an internet-connected way, which could be down to your mobile device, how you pay people internationally, and of course, lots of questions about the U.S. payment system very broadly. And so stablecoins or digital dollars is probably the simplest way to describe it, but not all of them are created equal, which is why we need U.S. laws to get passed.
Okay, and I want to get to that in a minute, but how does this differ from cryptocurrency or other kinds of currencies that we've heard, or is it the same?
Well, in some ways, stablecoins were born out of one of the original challenges we saw with cryptocurrencies, which was that a lot of cryptocurrencies were hyper volatile, or they subjected the end users to risk. Stablecoins, as the name suggests, were designed to be stable, and so in holding their price stable, for example, to the US dollar, they could be used as a medium of exchange, they could be used for payment systems, and they could be used more broadly in financial services. And so that's where the innovation has really born and come of age over the last 6 years.
So it is a form of cryptocurrency, but it is associated with the US dollar.
The vast majority of stablecoins in circulation today reference the US dollar. Probably 90% of them reference the US dollar, again, to varying degrees, but nonetheless, that's the core product. And stablecoins benefit from blockchain technology as the underlying ledger on which they're stored and sent. But at the end of the day, it's all about being able to send dollars outside of banking hours and to send dollars the way you and I might interact with WhatsApp or messaging platforms. It's about device-centric user control is what this allows you to do with your money.
So let's talk about the Genius Act, because this is Congress's attempt to regulate this sort of thing. And Congress has had a lot of trouble trying to regulate here. It seems like they're getting close to the finish line. What exactly would the Genius Act do?
So the Genius Act is a really, really important piece of legislation that has just come out of the Senate. It enjoyed deep bipartisan support. More than 18 Democrats supported it in the Senate. And what it would do is create a level playing field in the United States for dollar-denominated stablecoins. The Genius Act would create the legal category. It would call them payment stablecoins, and it would allow banks, non-banks, and effectively credit unions as well to compete, either at the state level or all the way up to having a federal charter. That's just the domestic piece of the puzzle. The Genius Act would also ensure that there's an America First framework for this really important innovation around the world, because the dollar is such a critical currency, not only in this category of activity, but also as a payment instrument, as a reserve currency around the world. So the Genius Act would give us a national framework that we could export to other countries.
So without this piece of legislation, what's the consequence of how it's all operating now?
Well, one of the things that I try to run the Genius Act through was what I call the Terra Luna test. Here in Washington, D.C., there was a so-called stablecoin that entered circulation into the United States. It even bought the naming rights for our baseball stadium here, and so its logo is still on the stadium. And over the course of a weekend, that product blew up, in effect because it would have failed the Jerry Maguire Show Me the Money test, and in effect was backed by nothing at all. And so that product caused a lot of losses. The Genius Act would prevent that type of product from entering circulation in the United States. It would create very clear boundaries on what can be called a stablecoin in the U.S. and what types of reserves have to back them, including criminal liability and criminal penalties for false advertising and misreporting and all of the rest. And then the last and most important piece is it would address national security issues by creating a level playing field to banks and other regulated companies with anti-money laundering, countering the financing of terrorism, and other security issues that matter to the country.
So without this, I mean, it's kind of operating as the Wild West here.
Well, in some ways, it isn't, in that companies like ours have always abided by pre-existing rules in the United States of America, but it does put the U.S. entities at a disadvantage to offshore companies or to other countries who in many respects might have clearer rules for regulating U.S. dollars than we do here in the United States. All of Europe, for example, has a very broad set of rules for this entire market, including broader crypto asset activity, but the U.S. doesn't yet. And so we're the outlier country right now, and there's a very simple choice which the Genius Act gives us the chance to answer. We either lead or we are led. And on this matter, the president has recently issued a tweet calling for action and calling for the Genius Act to come out of the House on a clean basis and to get passed into law. And we have an opportunity to do that, even perhaps ahead of the 4th of July.
Why do you think this is an issue that unites some lawmakers who otherwise wouldn't work together on anything? I mean, Kirsten Gillibrand from New York is a co-sponsor of this effort.
Sure. Well, number one, I would argue there's a lot of equities here that matter. The United States, especially when it comes to fintech innovation, the states are the laboratories of responsible innovation. And so you could see a lot of interest at the state level to help companies compete in this novel market. So that's a bipartisan issue. You, of course, also see a lot of consumer protection issues that matter pretty heavily to the Democrats and to many others. The Republicans as well have been pushing for a principled set of rules here. And then the last, of course, is this category is an export product. And so if we want to, in fact, have a world in which the U.S. dollar has its defense and its externalities and the ability to export U.S. dollars all over the world, to be able to render a dollar on an internet-connected device is a powerful breakthrough innovation, but it has to be rules-based. And so there's no better model of protecting the role of the U.S. dollar in the 21st century than federal law. And so I think seeing how unified Congress is very encouraging, because we haven't necessarily had a lot of political unity in our country, but around this matter, there's a unity of purpose which is rare.
Rare indeed. Well, we will stay tuned to whether this makes it out of the House, but as you mentioned, the president's backing might ensure that it does. Dante, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it. And that's it for us today. Stick around. The Daily Report is coming up next on CBS News 24/7.